Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar on interactivity. My name is Will Bowen. I work for UK Power Networks and I sit on an ENA working group as part of the Open Networks project to look at interactivity and establishing a consistent process of interactivity across the industry. As Courtney mentioned, and as per the slide that you can see at the moment, if you have any questions, please could you type them into the chat function and address the question to all panelists. And what myself and my colleagues will try to do is to answer any questions in the chat. And what I may also be able to do is to go through and cover any questions that have been asked during the presentation. If not, we'll do a catch up of any questions that were asked at the end of the slides. And we also are intending to circulate a list of all questions and answers that are raised. So in terms of interactivity, in July of last year, the ENA presented a minded to position for consistent industry-wide transmission and distribution interactivity. Responses to a published ENA consultation supported the proposal to adapt conditional interactivity as that industry-wide interactivity process. The ENA subsequently developed the principles and processes for conditional interactivity, presenting them at a customer webinar in February earlier on this year, and publishing in an interactivity guide in March of this year. This webinar revisits key aspects of conditional interactivity and summarises how these will be managed where interactivity occurs between a transmission application and a distribution application. And feedback from you today will help shape the final updates to the guide. So if we just go back to basics, what is interactivity? Interactivity network companies may receive 2 or more applications for connection, which would make use of the same part of the existing or future network, but where not all the applicants can be connected due to restrictions. So limited network capacity, fault levels, physical limitations, e.g. space, are examples of such restrictions. Such applications will be considered interactive with each other, and the interactivity process is the method by which the network companies determine which application is successful. And why do we need an interactivity process? This is to ensure that decisions made in how connections are allocated are transparent, consistent, fair, and simple enough to administer in large numbers. But conditional interactivity, what are the key features of conditional interactivity? So when interactivity is triggered, the applications are queued based on their respective application dates. The application that is first in the interactivity queue has first refusal on the connection. They are considered unconditional. Later applications depend on some or all of the earlier applications not being accepted, and they are conditional. Where possible, applicants will be given an early warning that they are interactive, and those connection offers that are issued in normal timescales and either as conditional or unconditional as appropriate. But interactive connection offers will be issued with a shorter acceptance validity timescale. So I'm going to take you through an illustration of that now. What we have here is a timeline from left to right, and 3 applications have been received. And this is, for the purposes of this illustration, this is a single company. It could be a DNO, it could be a transmission network. So a company has received 3 applications to connect, 1, 2, and 3 in that order. And the processes, their normal processes, commenced to prepare the offers for those applications. A short time after application 3 is received, The network company, in evaluating all of the applications, identifies potential interactivity. In other words, not all of these 3 applications can connect without further work to the network because of restrictions. The network company would send out an early warning of interactivity to all parties to put them on notice, to allow them to let them know that there is a potential interactivity scenario that they're involved in. Once application 1 is ready for issuing, an unconditional offer is issued to applicant number 1 with a validity period of 30 days. And a short time after, offer number 2 goes to applicant number 2, and this is a conditional offer that is also issued with a validity period of 30 days. And a short time after that, offer number 3 is issued to applicant number 3, again interactive, conditional, and with 30 days. Now, applicant number 2 accepts their offer soon after. Now, as that was conditional, the network company cannot confirm that whether they've been successful or not until effectively offer number 1 either accepts within their validity period or does not accept at all. And again, soon after that, an acceptance is received from applicant number 3. Again, that was a conditional offer, so it was conditional on some or all of the earlier applicants not accepting. And then at the tail end of applicant 1's validity period for their offer, they accept their offer. Now, applicant 1 was sent an unconditional offer, so they have been successful in the connection, in their connection application. So soon after that, very soon after that, offers 2 and 3 are withdrawn by the network company. Those offers are now no longer valid. The validity period that still effectively applied was lost due to that unconditional offer being accepted. And if applicants 2 and 3 would retain their queue position if they wanted to apply again within 10 working days. And again, just to illustrate that, if applicants 2 and 3 both reapplied again for connection, the same site, their same project, they would retain their respective queue position dates as long as they applied within 10 days. And the process again would start again with the network company preparing their offer. So let's just revisit a couple of key concepts. Unconditional and conditional offer. So an unconditional offer is not dependent on any other offer, i.e. it has first refusal, or to put another way, they're at the front of the interactivity queue. The unconditional offer may have already been issued, i.e. with standard terms and conditions and validity period when it became interactive. In this case, the validity period is reduced to 30 days when the subsequent interactive offer is sent, where more than 30 days remain. No change if fewer than 30 days. So in the illustration that we showed earlier on, we'd already identified that all of the applications were interactive before we sent any of them out. In the case where one of those had already been sent out, we would reduce the validity period to the 30 days once the subsequent offer had gone out. Conditional offers are dependent on some or all of the earlier offers not being accepted. So conditional offers are normally issued with 30 days validity, and where a conditional offer is accepted, the network company will need to validate whether the customer has been successful. And for the avoidance of doubt, no extension in terms of the validity period will be provided on any interactive offer. So we've got a couple of questions coming through here. Why would they need to reapply if the unconditional one has been accepted, in case it falls over for application 1 ? So yeah, applicants number 2 and 3 would not necessarily need to apply again, but clearly they've got a project. They may have a plan of action for a particular site. By applying again, what you would then find out is what you're applying for is the connection offer that you would receive, which, you know, from a DNO point of view, perhaps that would include reinforcement, whereas the earlier one wouldn't have included reinforcement. So if the project is still potentially going ahead, despite losing out on the first round of interactivity, the application to put another application in may still be a valid option. If you reapply, do you pay the A&D fees again? You'd have to check with the network company in particular as to whether the upfront A&D charge applies again. It may be that the solution has changed and the A&D fees are applied on the second time. But I think that the consensus is that A&D fees would apply on that second application, because it is a completely new application, and all of the assessment that the network company would need to do needs to be repeated again. So again, a modified application for a slightly different criteria would, for an application that wasn't successful, would be treated as a new application where there are changes to the application. Another question here: what if applicants 2 or 3 submit a modified request within 10 days? Yeah, so any material change to that from the first application, it would be treated as a new application, and you wouldn't retain the interactivity queue date, which may or may not be relevant. When does this come into force? Can it apply to existing quotations as it's coming in shortly, or is there any applications after a certain date? So this process is, so the working group has a target date by the end of this year for all individual network companies to adopt this conditional interactivity process. So that's on the ENA website. There are further details of those plans for those plans for going live. But the intention is for all individual network companies to have this established by the end of 2020. So just got another question here. What happens if no acceptances are received in time, or all applications then cancelled? So if, in that example earlier on, if all 3 of those applications pass their validity and nobody accepted, then it's all back to square one for whoever applies next. You know, the offers are sent with the validity period, and that they are valid for that amount of time. Sorry, I'm just trying to scroll up with these questions. There's a lot of questions coming in. Gosh.
Yeah, there's plenty coming through.
There's loads coming in. I hope we're not going to get this many questions on each slide. Gosh. Right. So
they are excellent questions.
They're very good questions. Yeah, very good. So the next one. If an offer has already been issued and other applications become interactive, does an unconditional interactive letter get issued to that customer and conditional to other applicants? So effectively, yes. If an offer had already been issued, then other applications came in and triggered interactivity. The normal process is to inform that customer that is holding an offer that we've already sent to them, to say, please be aware that this has gone interactive, and when we come to issue the subsequent interactive offer, we will reduce the validity period of your offer to 30 days, where 30 days or more applies or remains. And effectively that early warning, the early warning notice to that customer gives them the heads up that that may happen, but it doesn't change the status of their quotation that they were originally issued, other than to say at that point, please be aware this may go fully interactive if and when that subsequent offer is issued. So the next question is, if you are given a conditional offer, do you have to accept it before the unconditional accepts to qualify for keeping your queue position when reapplying within 10 working days? If you're given a conditional offer, do you have to accept it before the unconditional accepts to qualify? No, you don't. No. So if you are sent a conditional offer and it is withdrawn before the end of its validity date because the unconditional one accepted, or you're sent an conditional offer and you accept it within its validity period, yet you are still not successful, in both of those cases, you will retain your queue position date if you reapply within 10 days. If you're sent a conditional offer and you don't accept within its validity period, then you would not be able to recover your original queue position date. Right, the next question is, in the current interactivity process, the interactive queue is determined by application's clock start date. Are you saying it changes in this new process to the application receive date? So no, the clock start date for interactive quotations for a DNO application is minimum information received, and the clock start date for transmission applications is the competent application date. And they are the two. And again, so bearing in mind that what we're establishing here are rules and processes and principles for all industry companies. So next question, if each offer is given a 30-day validity, it's likely that each one will have a different expiry date. Does it mean that you will need to wait for the last quotes to expire before you can tell people the outcome? It depends how long the interactivity queue is. Generally speaking, you will need to wait for every offer in front of you in the queue to resolve, either to be accepted or to expire, before we can tell you the status of your application. The reason that I say it that way is that there are circumstances where offers are issued out of sequence, yet they still retain their relative queue position date. So it doesn't happen very often, but occasionally an offer that is in front of you will expire after yours does. So the key to this, however, is to be very clear about the validity period of your own offer and whether it is conditional or unconditional. And normally, the latest that you will have to know is the date that your offer expires, or the quote validity of your offer. But like I say, there are occasions where you have to wait longer than that. Just scrolling down now. If an existing offer is 25 days into its validity period and it becomes interactive, does the 30-day clock start again, or does it remain with the original validity period of 3 months, leaving it only 5 days or so to accept? So if an existing offer is 25 days into its validity period and it becomes interactive, so if it was issued before it became interactive, it would probably have 90 days on. Does the 30-day clock start again, or does it remain with the original validity period of 3 months, therefore leaving it only 5 days? So yes, if you if your quotation was issued with 90 days and for example, you are 10 days before the end of that 90 days where we say to you, it's interactive, you wouldn't then get 30 days from that point. It would remain to that original quote validity date. The point here being that you've already had the 90 days issued to you, and in that case you would likely to be the unconditional offer, so it's still with you on that original validity date. It won't be extended where it's made interactive towards the end of your validity period. So the next one, different DERs have different impact on the network. How do you plan to address this? In terms of the timescale taken to issue quotes from the DNOs, from the DNO point of view, there isn't any difference in terms of the timescales that we issue. The quotes are issued within their normal non-interactive timescales, if you like. The only thing that is different is that the quotation that is issued will just have the 30 days on, for example, and be conditional or unconditional. So I'm not sure whether I understand the question, but in terms of different DERs having different impact on the network, I don't think it impacts the timescale for issuing the quote. So, and the final question so far, afternoon, my question, are the DNOs obliged to explain why application is interactive? I got a few interactive offers and nothing mentioned on the reasons for interactivity. That's a good question. I don't think that we're obliged. I don't think the network companies are obliged to tell you the exact reasons, but generally speaking, it is one of 2 or 3 general reasons: fault level, heat level, space, and it may well be that that information will be provided at that time. So another question, is there a minimum amount of days for a conditional offer to be accepted once interactivity has been triggered? An applicant can find itself with a short period of accepting its offer if there was a significant period against the first applicant. I might have to think about that one. I don't think that there's a minimum time, a minimum amount of days for a conditional offer to be accepted. Any offer that's accepted, conditional or unconditional, if it's issued when it's interactive, will be given 30 days. There's no minimum amount of time that an offer will be issued, less than 30 days. An applicant can find itself with a short period for accepting its offer if there was a significant period against the first applicant. So again, as soon as you've got 2 applications out there that are interactive with each other, theoretically, neither of them will have longer than 30 days from that point. Next question, what happens when offer 3 is sent out with only 2 days remaining of interactivity for offer 1 and 2? Do we extend the dates of offer 1 and 2 by a further 30 days, as the last offer will have 90 days validity, the other 2 may have 45 days to run? So again, so if offer 3 is sent out with 2 days remaining before the previous offers extend, would you extend the offer of 1 and 2? We wouldn't extend the offer validity for 1 and 2 by a further 30 days. So offers 1 and 2 would have had their validity, their quote validity date set, and offer 3, as and when it is ready to send, will be sent with 30 days validity. But it may be, and and it also may be irrelevant on how much time is left. There are scenarios where conditional offers are sent to the customer, and very soon after that are having to be withdrawn because the unconditional offer has been accepted. Once the applicants have received early warning, if the unconditional offer accepts prior to conditional offer being issued, can this reset the clock for the preparation of revised design solution of the conditional offers? No. So the early warning is there to put people on notice. If that turns out to prompt the unconditional applicant or the applicant that is holding an unconditional offer to accept, or the unconditional offer is accepted anyway, quite naturally, then it is for the network company then to provide a standard offer to the person that would have otherwise received a conditional offer. So by the unconditional offer being accepted, that may resolve all of the interactivity for that particular site or that particular area at that moment in time. Next question. I think the next question, if an early warning has been sent to the first applicant who has an offer and they accept immediately, having been given the advance notice, does the DNO target date for the other inquiries still to be issued and offer remain unchanged to identify an alternative solution? So again, that is the same as the previous question. No, that wouldn't change the original target date for issuing the quote for the conditional offer. So, Courtney, I've read all of those from the chat, and I've just seen that there are things coming up on the Q&A. Are you copying those across?
Yes, you've covered all of them. Thanks, Will.
Okay, good.
Although if anyone's submitted a question that hasn't been answered, feel free to flag it to me, but I think we've covered everything so far. There really is plenty going through. So thank you everyone for being so engaged and asking such insightful questions. It's really cool.
And you know, there's a lot of good questions being answered, and these the interactivity guide that's on the ENA website covers most, if not all, of these questions. So, you know, that already has those basic principles set in. So feel free to refer to that as well on the ENA website. So let's crack on. Let's crack on to this next slide. Where are we? Hang on. So again, conditional interactivity, acceptance, and allocation. Unconditional offers must be accepted and paid for within the validity period and within the standard network company terms, i.e. this is normally payment in full or part. Conditional offers do not require payment until the application is confirmed as successful by the network company. Stage 1 is signed acceptance of the connection offer received by the network company within the validity period. If successful, the network company notifies the applicant and requests payment within 10 days. And stage 2 for that conditional offer is payment received by the network company within the 10 days. However, if unsuccessful, i.e. if the person with a conditional offer doesn't accept within the validity period or doesn't pay within the 10 days after being requested, they would need to reapply. No new questions, lovely. Reapplications and queue positions. So network companies will notify unsuccessful applicants once the connection allocation has been confirmed. Customers who accepted their conditional offer to stage 1, acceptance but not payment, but were unsuccessful, will be given the opportunity to retain their original queue position. To retain their queue position in any further round of interactivity, customers would need to reapply within 10 days of the notification. Customers who did not accept to stage 1 will also need to reapply. In the case of any subsequent interactivity, these offers will be a queue position based on their new application date. Note for all reapplications, there may be an additional charge for this, and customers should check with their relevant network company we're talking about A&D charge there. Okay, so that was just a recap of the basic principles of conditional interactivity. Like I said, the user guide covers those questions and gives a number of different scenarios for different points in the end-to-end process, a number of scenarios and some Q&A. So please feel free to refer to that. Now, building upon those principles is interactivity between transmission and distribution. So we're talking here about two completely separate applications, one to the transmission company and one to the distribution company. And interactivity can occur between transmission and distribution, where an application to connect to the transmission network triggers interactivity with an in-flight application to the distribution system, or vice versa. Transmission companies will identify interactivity following an interaction with the DNO. However, each individual network company will manage the interactions directly with their customers. So, before we go into a couple of scenarios to look at this, we just need to draw out the difference between project progression and transmission impact assessment. Where there is a known impact on the transmission system, or the DNO believes the connection of generation to the network will have an impact to the transmission system, the DNO will follow the statement of works process. This process requires DNOs to submit statement of works request and/or project progression application to National Grid ESO to identify what, if any, requirement is required to accommodate the new connection. And to be clear, the project progression application made by the DNO is the interactive application. So that's project progression. Now, another way is, at certain grid supply points on the network, an alternative process has been established between DNOs and National Grid ESO, transmission impact assessment. This process was developed as part of Open Networks project and is commonly referred to as an Appendix G. Under this process, DNOs provide a list to NG ESO of all generators already connected or contracted to connect with a specific GSP, including size and type, for review by NG ESO and the transmission operators. And in return, NG ESO provide an available headroom at these GSPs to the DNO. So we've got two scenarios, one where there is a transmission impact assessment in place and one where there isn't. So we're going to look at just going to work through a couple of scenarios now. One where the TIA is in place. So a transmission application triggers interactivity with a DNO application, TIA applies. So we've got two timelines here, going from left to right, transmission and distribution. And the distribution, the DNO has received an application to connect to the network, and that application to connect to the GSP will utilize an agreed TIA headroom or capacity at that GSP. And the DNO will start its normal process of preparing a connection offer. And soon after that, the transmission receive an application to connect to their network. And again, that would trigger their normal offer preparation work. However, as part of that early assessment, NG ESO identified that transmission application 2 may utilize the headroom that has been provided to the DNO and requests an up-to-date information from the DNO of any in-flight applications. The DNO provides info if any in-flight applications that propose to use so the DNO will update any applications that are received, including distribution application number 1 there on the slide, or anything else that perhaps has happened subsequent to that application. The DNO will provide that information back to transmission, and then NG-ESO confirms interactivity and informs the DNO. And as we mentioned, each company will issue their own customers with an early warning of potential interactivity. Again, that's a key part of the process, is to make sure that customers are aware that the quotation is interactive and that it may be issued with a shorter timescale, and that there are implications if it's not accepted within the timescale. So again, the DNO's process continues, and a interactive offer, an unconditional offer, is issued to the distribution customer with 30 days. And soon after that, a conditional offer, again with 30 days validity, is issued to the transmission customer. So just got some questions here from how and when does NG-ESO advise TSO of interactivity? So behind the scenes at the moment, we're working on the process. There are interactions between NG-ESO and the TOs when an application is received, and we're working on that in terms of establishing the process of communication between NG-ESO, TOs and the DNOs in terms of, at that moment in time, to identify whether interactivity applies or not. So it would, in terms of when the advice is made, that's early in the process of the T application. Under statement of works or Appendix G, how does a DNO identify if their application came first or not? Does the ESO provide proof of the date of applicant applied for, and vice versa? So the information that is provided by the DNO to NG-ESO will include the application date. I don't think that we've talked about whether the information will be sent back from NG-ESO. What if BNO advises NG of applicant 1 utilising some proportion of headroom before applicant 2 is submitted? So again, that would, if applicant number 1 had not accepted their offer, but we, for whatever reason, had informed NG-ESO that we had application 1, we were processing application 1, it would still be potentially interactive with any application that they came through. So the information on interactivity is kind of, you know, fresh at that moment in time. So that to identify whether interactivity applies or not needs up-to-date information, and at that point NG-ESO should have visibility of all in-flight applications, and the key question is, can all of these applications connect without any further works, without reinforcement, or not? And if the question is they cannot all accept and connect, then interactivity is triggered. Okay, that was, so move on to the next slide. Okay, so then this is just an extension of the previous slide. So here we have transmission have their conditional offer issued, the distributor has issued their unconditional offer. And then towards the end of the validity period, the distribution customer accepts their offer, the unconditional offer. DNO would inform NG-ESO and the transmission offer would be withdrawn. And similar to the basic process, the validity period would be lost due to the unconditional offer being accepted. And T application would retain their queue position if they were to reapply within 10 days. And again, that only applies if a subsequent round of interactivity is triggered. So it's possible that there would be no further interactivity. Okay, so if ESO doesn't provide their dates, how can the process be transparent and fair? That's a good question. We'll have to think about that. What if offer 2 goes out before offer 1? Again, as I mentioned earlier on, there are, because the DNO, within the DNO and maybe even across the DNO and transmission, some of the quotation, the timescales for issuing a quotation are different from different voltage levels, and for whatever reason, offers may be issued out of sequence compared to their application date and their queue position date. However, the queue position date is what is the important thing, and therefore you may have a conditional offer sent out a few days or an amount of time before the relevant unconditional offer is sent out. And the downside to that is it extends the time that it would take for the network company to confirm who was successful. So it's unfortunate, but that is one of the scenarios that we have faced occasionally. Okay. So moving on. So project progression, queue position date. So this is a very important, we did mention it very briefly earlier on, that the project progression is the interactive item. So the TIA scenario, the transmission impact assessment, the Appendix G scenario on the previous slide, queues applications based on the initial application dates from the customer to the network company. So that is min info date for DNOs, competent application date for transmission companies. Where there's no TIA in place, any interactivity triggered would normally be identified after a project progression is submitted by the DNO, and it's this date that is taken as the queue position date for the DNO application. This may be several months after the DNO's initial application, and there may also have been a statement of work process. And there's a balance here to be considered. Using the original DNO application date, which provisionally puts someone in an interactive queue for several months before the queue is even identified. And that could be the first time that the transmission companies have sight of the DNO application is when the project progression is made. And again, that's what the little timeline at the bottom of this slide is just trying to represent here. The DNO application on the bottom on the left, DNO receives an application, and in the earlier scenarios, that would be the queue position date. Let's say, for example, 3 months later, the offer is sent to the customer. It's not interactive at that stage. It's the customer is given 90 days to accept. So that could be another 3 months and the customer accepts. There may be an amount of time before the DNO makes a statement of works application. The statement of works may not even be, that statement of works process may not even be utilized. It may go straight through to the project progression. So when you get to the project progression, that in many ways, that could be the first time that the transmission company has had sight of that application. So the proposal and the scenario that we're about to look at, and the information that will go into the guide, is using this project progression application date as the relevant interactivity date for the DNO application. Although it must be said that it's not a requirement for the application to go through the statement of works, or even to have the offer sent prior to putting that project progression in. It is possible for the DNO customer and the DNO to put that project progression application in right at the beginning of the process. So that is something that to take into account. So one question I think it needs a common timetable of CAs. Okay, we'll follow up on that. Okay, so this is the second scenario. Transmission application triggers interactivity with DNO application project progression. This is part one, as in this scenario is split over 2 slides. Again, on the distribution timeline, a offer has a DNO issues a connection offer subject to statement of works and or project progression. And obviously, the DNO application date is further to the left. And that offer is accepted. And then at some point after that, the transmission companies receive an application to connect to the transmission network, and that process starts preparing the offer. And then after that point, the DNO will puts in the application for project progression. And at this point, you've got the scenario here is that NG ESO will, at that point, they're looking at both of these applications. It may be the first site that they've got of the project progression from the DNO, and they're saying, well, we can't connect both of these without reinforcement. We can connect one, but not the other, effectively. So NG ESO confirm potential interactivity and informs the DNO. And again, at that point, each company issues their customers an early warning of interactivity to put them on standby. They may be receiving an offer with only 30 days to accept. Again, the normal process continues with the transmission offer, and they will issue an unconditional offer for the transmission application with 30 days on. And then soon after that, National Grid issues a conditional project progression offer. So they issue a project progression offer to the DNO, which is conditional and with 30 days validity on it. And very soon after that, the DNO notifies the applicant of the requirements to connect. So this is, so the DNO will liaise and contact with the customer to get them to understand and be aware of the requirements that they will be under. And that will also have a 30 days validity on it. And then in terms of 2, again, you've got here, taken through from the previous slide, transmission application has gone out, the project progression has gone out from transmission to distribution. And then towards the end of the transmission validity date, the transmission offer is accepted. And soon after that, the transmission company will withdraw the offer that was made to the DNO on the customer's behalf. And again, the validity period at that point will be lost. But the de-application again would retain their queue position if they were to reapply within 10 working days of the notice. So whether that is a likely scenario or not, whether that triggers a second level of interactivity, it will be on a case-by-case basis. So that's it for the slides. That is it for the slides. We're now on Q&A. So how are we doing for... So, so Courtney or any of the other panelists, are there any questions do you think that are unanswered that you can cover off that you've spotted, or any clarifications to any of the answers that I've given that you can identify?
So I believe that we've covered everything that's come through, but if anyone feels like something's still unclear or they could use a bit more information, feel free to message me in the chat and we can go back to your question. And I also wanted to mention as well that we do have our Open Networks mailbox opennetworks@energynetworks.org, exactly on the slide here. So feel free to send us an email with any further questions that you may have, and we could even possibly connect you via telephone. Oh, and I'm so sorry, we've just had one more come through. I'll forward it through to you now, Will.
Sure.
Will, is Peter Aston here, Western Power.
Hi, Peter.
I was just going to chip in, Will, on that there are a couple of questions a little bit earlier on around the ESO providing the dates. So thinking back to the transmission impact assessment sort of / Appendix G type approach. So that the DNO will provide the dates of all of their applications to the ESO. I think at the point, so someone said, I think it needs a common timetable of sort of connection applications. I think that's essentially what we've looked at doing already, is that essentially the ESO will compile a list of all the DNO application dates and any transmission application dates into a sort of one overall queue based on application dates, sort of based on a clock start date, I should say. So essentially that common timetable is there in the process. Maybe wasn't as clear as it should be, but yes, I would say, Will, that's probably already there. We've got that covered.
Yes, thanks, Pete. Thanks, Peter.
Well, it's Deborah here. Just picking up on one of the questions that's come through regarding ESO products like RDP affected by T&D. I guess RDP doesn't make offers. The only ability to get offers for the DNO is under Statement of Works or the Transmission Impact Assessment Appendix G process. So that covers all scenarios where any connectees to the DNO network would result in offers being made.
Okay, thanks, Deborah. Yeah, I just to say we've got Peter from WPD. We've got Deborah and a couple of other guys from transmission companies. So it's not just me and Courtney. Right. Ooh, Will, there's a few more questions coming through.
Yeah, I was going to say there was a question that's come through about the project progression process and sort of apparent fairness or otherwise, because of course in the slide, you might want to go back a couple of slides, Will, where you showed the that project progression process where effectively the offer came into the DNO. And then the offer was the application. Yeah, so go back another slide. One more. Yeah, that one there. So I think there was a question raised about fairness, because obviously in this example here that you're showing on the screen there, Will. Yeah, that one there. You've got the DNO application came in ahead of the transmission application, but then the project progression application from the DNO to the ESO goes in after the transmission application. So, and I think the crucial thing on this one, like you referred to a little bit earlier, Will, is the timing of that project progression application, isn't it? That project progression application theoretically could go in at any point after the customer made an application to the DNO. So that timing of that application is really down to a discussion between the DNO and the DNO's customer as to how quickly the DNO puts that project progression application in. And obviously, the longer it's left, the more of a potential sort of disparity there could be between the D application and the T application dates in any interactive queue.
Yes, you're right. As I had on the previous slide here, you know, there's a number of different points in the DNO process, the first 3 and possibly 4, where, you know, alternatives to the project progression. but there could be a long time between those different points on the timeline there, and there is nothing to the project progression can be made earlier on in the process. The project progression can be made with the DNO application right at the beginning, and we're trying to balance here between if we took the original DNO application date, that could be 9 months before, for argument's sake, before the project progression is made. So that's a big chunk of time, during which time, or a lot of things could have changed on the network. But you could say that here, could this project progression have been moved earlier to very soon after offer 1 had been accepted? If offer 1 was sent out here and before the acceptance was made, that could quite possibly the discussions at that point could prompt and promote the project progression to be put in earlier. So I think the question here is just to recognise that this is this date here is very important. It's not fixed in terms of where it appears in the process, and it is the object that it's currently the object that the transmission will look at in terms of the application to consider, is this interactive or not? Okay, so there were a few more questions. ESO RDP, sorry, Deborah caught that one. On the last example, T will get preference over D, even though D applied first. Yes, that's as I've just described, based upon that project progression application. Did you say the slides will be distributed? Sorry, yes. I think the intention will be that we're recording this at the moment, and that record will be available on the ENA website, as will the slides. Can you send me the PowerPoint presentation? We'll publish the slides on the ENA network, and presumably we will also contact people that have that were on the mailing list to say that that's where when they are available. And that's from. Can you send me the PowerPoint presentation? Yes. Project progression part 2, unfair to DNO application, has lost his accepted offer made before TSOs. What? Again, that's the point that we're trying to be very clear about here, is that that's what what we're building on at the moment, is this project progression application date. What if the DNO applicant responds, see you in court? Sure, not sure about that. Without context, project progression.
I think Will.
Sorry.
Yeah. It's Peter here again. Will, I think the context for that "see you in court" comment was around, again, the project progression process, whereby the DNO applicant, who'd obviously applied some time before the transmission applicant, in respect of when the project progression application was made, sort of effectively got swapped around in date order, and so I think the comment was sort of suggesting if that happens and you get that sort of swap around because of effectively the delay in project progression application, that does the DNO customer have any sort of legal comeback in any queues? I don't know. I know, Will, that's not something we specifically discussed. I think for me, maybe you've got a different view on this, Will, but for me, the issue there is around the DNO discussing the matter with their customer, and if the customer knows the implications of having that, what the project progression date is, then the customer can make that decision on when that project progression application goes in.
Peter, just on that, I guess it's worth remembering that that's the process as it exists today for
Indeed,
any
yeah.
application. So it's not something that's been newly introduced to a process. But I think the key point is either yourself or Will mentioned that there's nothing to stop that project progression kicking off as soon as possible in the process, and that's down to the dialogue between the customer and the DNO party. To initiate that, but it's not a new change. That is already a risk for parties today.
I guess, sorry, it's Dan here, just to kind of echo that as well. So I think the important thing to note with project progressions is that the DNOs need to submit them only when the remaining headroom that's been given to that DNO has been exceeded. Obviously, if the DNO acceptance is within the headroom, it just forms part of the monthly update process. So I think to the questions that keep coming in about this, I think obviously the timing is very critical, isn't it, for the DNOs to get this in as early as possible?
They are, Daniel, but this was more in relation to project progression that's related to statement of works. So that would be very much tracked back on that. You would have, more instances of those dates being triggered, whereas obviously parties might already secure their headroom under the other. But yeah, in terms of that, that's down to, it's not necessarily initiated by a party under the project progression for the TIA process. That's more down to the DNO recognising the need for that to happen.
Okay, thanks, Deborah, Daniel. So and again, I think the alternative way of thinking about that application is to say it's not an application, it's a notification of the offer and acceptance. Again, I think that's all. We need to think carefully about the timing of that and the conversation between the customer that's holding an offer that is subject to statement of works and project progression. I think it's very clear what we need to do is to have that open dialogue and make it very clear at what point are we going to initiate this project progression from a DNO's perspective. But that's some good points coming out over that. Is there any more questions that we need to cover off, Courtney, that you can see, or the other guys that are panelists?
No, everything's in that chat there at the moment, so I think we've covered everything. But there is a lot of information, isn't there?
Sorry?
I said there is a lot of information, isn't there?
Yeah. And we're going to we'll be able to extract this chat, won't we? So we can just double check the questions that have been asked.
Yes, we certainly will. Yep.
Right. Okay. Well, so again, if I leave that landing page, please feel free to contact us at that email address there, and that will get forwarded on to the working group. On the ENA webpage, there is the current conditional interactivity guide published. The intention is to add a section on transmission to distribution, and I think an earlier version of a draft version of that has been added to the invite. And certainly the purpose of this, very well attended, and some excellent questions were raised. I think the intention is to take that feedback and just to make sure that we're capturing it right in the updated guide. I think we're looking to update that guide in terms of transmission and distribution by the end of September. You'll also find on the ENA page the plans for when distribution companies will go live with this conditional interactivity themselves individually. But we would be looking, I think, at transmission interactivity between transmission and distribution would require all companies to be on the basic principles to start off with, which will happen after the end of this year. So I can't see any more questions coming through, so thank you very much Courtney, for your help, and Dan, and your help and support to run this webinar. Thanks